Wilson Alexander is covering the LSU football team, NOLA.com, and The Advocate. As always, he's with us here every Tuesday. Brian Kelly going to meet with the press here in about 40 minutes. Anxious to hear what Coach Kelly has to say. Wilson, I wonder what you anticipate. Is there anything that you anticipate hearing this morning other than an update here from the LSU head football coach?
I mean, I hope that we get something a little bit more definitive about what he may do with the defensive staff, or Matt House in particular. Certainly intend to ask him about it, and maybe we can get some insight into his plans. When he talked about that evaluation process, it was all 7 to 10 days from about the end of the regular season, that last Monday, and we're right about that. And so maybe we can get something a little bit more definitive. If not, then it'll probably be some talk about Wisconsin and Jaden Daniels being a Heisman finalist officially. But that would be the place where we can maybe get some real answers, and maybe we can also get some real answers about some approach to the transfer portal.
What is it like covering the portal? I mean, I'm looking at 500 names that entered yesterday. LSU's got a couple of guys, including LaTerrence Welsh and Trey Bradford are in there amongst some other guys. How are you watching this? What are you looking out for as far as the coverage on this?
Yeah, I mean, you're just looking out for who's entering and who is entering from other schools who LSU may have an interest in, and trying to kind of gauge that in particular, because that's what's going to be really influential for next year's team. When you're looking at guys, entering, especially, maybe like a Jair Brown, Will Shepherd, the receiver from North Texas, Macklin, I mean, other guys like that, when they're entering, and then maybe trying to find out if LSU has interest in these guys, if they're maybe going to target some of them. Just that kind of thing. It's very typical in college football these days, of course, and it'll be like that for the next 30 days. But even not really until then, just because, all you have to do is get in the portal, of course, about the next 30 days, because then after that, then guys can continue to commit as long as they're in.
Wilson, are you keeping up with recruiting during this time? If so, the Gabe Relaford story. Relaford was in last weekend. He decommits to Texas A&M. Shortly after that, he takes a trip to USC, and then on Friday he'll decide between Southern California and LSU. What are you hearing on the defensive tackle out of Evangel?
Certainly a lot of momentum in LSU's favor, which is great, because they need defensive linemen in a bad way, especially in this class. And if you can get someone like Gabe Relaford, and pair him with someone like Sean Washington, the JUCO defensive lineman who they brought in, and some of the other folks who they've got, then you start to build up a defensive line room that's a little bit more encouraging long term. And he would be a big pickup for them. 4-star guy. Certainly being able to bring him on campus last week was huge. And if they can end up finishing off that flip, then that'll be awesome for this class. Maybe aren't going to get Dominic McKinley. There doesn't seem to be any buzz about that. But if you can at least get Gabe Relaford, then that is certainly a good thing still in this class, to be able to get a defensive lineman, which they desperately need to do. And that's probably one of the main positions of need, because it's just so vital. On the defensive interior, you got to be able to have size, clog up those holes, create some pressure and havoc as well. And we saw LSU didn't get as much out of its defensive tackles as it probably really needed to this season. But it needs to make sure that, because they're kind of veteran guys that are there right now, they need to be able to backfill. And so Gabe Relaford's a huge piece of that. Some
positions that came available, obviously, that are at least look pretty inviting in the transfer portal, and have some guys that make sense for LSU going on past of how they've recruited. Guys with Louisiana ties have become available. A couple of names here, Wilson, anything that you're hearing on him. Jordan Gilbert, a safety out of Baton Rouge who went to University High. He's transferring from Texas A&M. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. And then Will Shepherd, who is a South Louisiana kid who I believe went to Mandeville and spent the last 2 years at Vanderbilt, over 2,000 yards. LSU obviously in the market for a veteran wide receiver. Possible fit, any communication, any updates on those types of players?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, just because the fact that they're both Louisiana guys, you would think that LSU has interest in them right off the bat because they're especially, they're at positions of need. They would make a lot of sense for LSU. Both of them would. You start with Gilbert, and that's somebody who didn't play much this year. I think he had a shoulder injury, but he started 10 games in 2022, and that's at safety where LSU needs to get some safeties in. Regardless of what happens with Major Burns and his decision. It would be a tough spot going into next season if you don't bring in a transfer because you just got a lot of inexperience back there. And that's a tough way to live, as we saw this year at times in the defensive backfield. And so, that would be a massive pickup if LSU can get him. Same thing with Will Shepherd, because, like you said, I think they probably just need the one veteran transfer receiver just to kind of balance out the experience in that room because you don't necessarily want to block all the playing time for those young guys, but they need to maybe have someone above them who's played a little bit more football. And Will Shepherd would make a ton of sense because he's a Mandeville guy and because he's played in the SEC. And so, he's probably going to have a lot of suitors as somebody who, has done what he has over the last couple seasons. But that would be definitely somebody to keep an eye on with this LSU team and see if maybe they can reel him in. And same thing with Gilbert.
Wilson, will you be making the trip to New York?
Yes, I will. Leave Thursday.
What's that mean for LSU, having another player in this setting, in this presence for this award? How does LSU use this to its advantage? I mean, it was unbelievable that Burrow was there. Now to be back in just this short amount of time is kind of crazy in itself.
And it does so much for what they want to do in terms of recruiting quarterbacks, like what Joe Sloan can pitch to people and Mike Denbrock and Brian Kelly, what they can pitch to these quarterbacks. I mean, you think about how Bryce Underwood is committing on January 6th and, the number one player and quarterback in that 2025 class. Well, they can say, look what we just did with Jaden Daniels. And that could be you. And they can continue to do that because now you've got, most likely 2 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks in the last 5 years. And think about where LSU's quarterback position was. I know I'm not, telling anybody anything new here, but it was quarterback purgatory for years. And now you've got these 2 guys who are Heisman Trophy winners, 2 of the best players in LSU history who have come through here. LSU's really gotten worked out with those 2 in the transfer market. And now you're looking at some ways that in terms of what you can do, long-term with these is just a massive recruiting tool. And it creates so much good publicity for this program, especially, coming off of a 9-3 season. There's still something very big to be able to hang your hat on in terms of, especially at the quarterback position, what they can do with individual development, because you saw how much in particular Jaden improved from last season to this season. That's all just good things that this staff can use to sell.
Wilson, should I read into Marvin Harrison being invited to New York that he's going to win the Biletnikoff?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, if he were, maybe I guess it could be different, but if there's that kind of, there's 870 media members who vote on the Heisman, plus the old, all the still living Heisman winners plus 1 fan vote, and it's kind of a similar pool who's voting on the Biletnikoff, I think, and so maybe not the same number of people, but it's probably going to end up being Marvin Harrison. It felt like it was probably going to be that way for, I guess, a little bit, just because of what he has accomplished in his career. Maybe ends up kind of being like a career achievement award for him. And he's a great receiver, not to take away from him, but it does sting for Malik that he probably isn't going to win that. Maybe we'll see something different happen. And if so, then great for Malik, because he certainly deserves it or is worthy of it, right up there with Harrison.
Would Jake Simpson have a Heisman vote?
Yes.
He does?
Yes. What did you think of the draw to the ReliaQuest Bowl to face off against Wisconsin? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's kind of lackluster. I mean, to think that LSU is going to end this out with a 7-5 unranked team, but I got the sense LSU had no interest in playing in the Citrus Bowl, and that the Citrus Bowl wasn't really crazy about maybe bringing LSU back. The Citrus Bowl gets a pick their team there, and so obviously they went with Tennessee. Bringing LSU back for the 2nd year in a row, when LSU's already been in the Orlando area like 3 times in the last 2 seasons, because he played at Florida and then obviously the 2 games there in Orlando. That would have been it would have been tough to probably get fans there from LSU's side, especially if you didn't have an interesting team on the other side, with Notre Dame not becoming the team there because of the way that things just sort of the domino effect of what happened with the CFP and the New York Six game. So it is not, so I think that's kind of why LSU ended up in the ReliaQuest. And, kind of interesting that and weird that they're playing a 7-5 team in that game, but that's just kind of the way the Big Ten shakes out. And so, LSU should be favored, but Wisconsin's got a pretty stingy defense. And if Jaden doesn't play, then that'll be kind of the most interesting thing, I think, is how Garrett Nussmeier does against that unit. But we'll kind of see, how opt-outs go over the next few weeks here in terms of who LSU and Wisconsin will have available, because Wisconsin doesn't have its star running back either. And so it's hard to see them having the firepower to keep up with LSU.
Yeah, I agree. And, do you expect to see Malik for a couple of plays to get that record? I do. I think that, I think he's so close to something that is so historic that, what's a series or two? But he's a projected top 10 pick, right?
Yeah, but I could definitely see like what you're saying, where maybe they get that record and then he waves to everybody. He does the little heart that he loves to do, and then he heads on out.
Right.
And I wouldn't fault him one bit if that was the only reason that he played in the game, was to get to 22 yards and then ended up. I mean, and it would also be. I fully expected to do that. I mean, we can only go at this point based on what he was so impassioned with what he was saying after this regular season finale, how badly he wanted to play in the bowl game. He was like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll have to think about it, but like, I really want this record. Like, he was pretty darn adamant about it. And so maybe he ends up changing his mind. And if he does, wouldn't fault him one bit. Like, you've got an NFL career ahead of you. You're going to be a top 10 pick. Like, don't risk that. But, get a couple catches, break that record, and then, spend the rest of the game cheering on your teammates. That's fine too. Or, Malik, man, he likes to play football now, and he might end up just playing the whole game too.
Yeah. Wilson, it'd be an upset if Jaden Daniels doesn't win the Heisman at this point, right?
Oh, huge upset. Yeah. The odds are, gosh, he's minus 1,400. It was incredible watching that on Friday, where he kind of pulls ahead of Bo Nix. Like, Bo Nix is falling back, and like watching the odds was like watching election returns or something like that. And then Jaden just shoots forward. That was pretty sweet. And so now I'll be stunned if on Saturday he's not the one lifting that trophy.
All right, make sure you're following Wilson Alexander for a couple of reasons. He'll be in New York. He's leaving Thursday. He'll be covering the Heisman Memorial Trophy as that will be awarded on Saturday night, as he just said. Brian Kelly coming up with the media here in less than 30 minutes. He will begin at 9 a.m. Coach Kelly always on time, so that should be pretty succinct at 9 a.m. You want to follow Wilson for what the latest is on the tidbits coming out of Coach Kelly's presser, and that is at WHAlexander_, and he's with us every Tuesday. Appreciate it, buddy. Safe travels. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.